I remember years ago, I was trying to learn programming on my own, from the Khan Academy JavaScript Canvas thing to trying to learn some C# from YouTube videos. I had no real knowledge of programming, but I was interested and I wanted to learn more. So my parents signed me up for a class with this teacher, Danny. He was a very smart developer working on hardware at Samsung, went to college for computer science, university, and there's no doubt that he was very knowledgeable on programming, had a lot of experience. But his teaching was terrible. I remember going to classes, typing out code that he would tell us to copy down, and I wouldn't understand anything. He had us doing some Java, stuff with Android Studio, but the thing is, I didn't know Java. And to this day, I still don't remember or understand anything that Danny was trying to teach us. And I was still learning my own stuff at the time, but I don't remember anything from that class. It's like, how do I learn to program a certain thing if I don't know how to program at all? And reflecting on that experience, I started understanding why I couldn't learn. Because I had a lack of understanding of all of the underlying reasons why anything worked. And I think this came from Danny's experience and knowledge. Of course, he wanted to teach as much as possible, but from that, he kind of skipped out on a lot of knowledge that in his mind was probably basic and obvious, something that I should know. But the ideas Danny's were teaching didn't actually work towards building an understanding of programming or how anything really worked. It was just write this code and you'll get this outcome. Later on though, he did actually start teaching stuff that I could understand, like computer science concepts, and he was actually an alright teacher after. But what was interesting to me and what made me think of this was that I actually found myself in this exact situation years later on the other end. I was teaching a course for C++. It was a class on some of the basics of the language and just programming basics in general. So it was the first class, and we introduced the course would generally be about, got everyone set up to write some code, and we just taught some basics of C++. For our class, we used a website called Replit to run programs. Replit being an online IDE that lets you, write and run code. And the reason that we choose to use Replit is because it's just the easiest option for everyone to set up. So as I introduce Replit to the class, I start to think and reflect on my own experience being taught about programming. I think to myself, these kids are here just to learn programming. Their parents probably just signed them up for the class, and they probably know nothing about programming. Of course, there were some kids that obviously were already interested and looked into programming on their own, but most of these kids probably had no idea what programming was. I think about my own thoughts as someone that knew nothing about programming all those years ago. Realize I probably should have explained to the class at least how a program runs. Right? To them and to myself, well, coding is just, it's a fun thing. You type in some stuff, you type in text, you use this program, whatever IDE. You type in your code, you press the run code button, easy. It can be fun to learn about programming like this, but as you start to learn more, and as the case with myself and a lot of the kids in the class, you kind of start to realize you have no idea what's going on further along. And I fault myself as a teacher, because in later classes, that's exactly what happened, right? Of course, some of these students already had an understanding of programming. They did pretty good, but a lot of these students that did not already have an understanding of programming and did not, have prior interest in it, they had no idea what was going on. And I could see this when they're trying to fix issues with their code. Of course, when they ran into errors in their code, it just didn't make sense. They had no idea how the program even works. And of course, this is just my fault as a teacher. So I start thinking about the past and how I myself learned to code. And I was always told to just use whatever software to run the code, just like Replit and also other IDEs that made it easy to run code. It's like Visual Studio and IntelliJ, where you just press a button and the code runs. At that point, I didn't even know what a compiler was. I didn't know about interpreted and compiled languages. Like, what even was the computer doing to run the code? What is running code? What does that mean, right? I had nothing in my mind about that. I just knew if I write out specific text, my program would do specific stuff and hit that magic button that runs the code. And this was before switching to Vim. And with Vim, there are no tools built in. There are no magic buttons that do the work for you. And because of this, I had to learn with command line tools to run programs. And from my experience learning to work with these tools, I'd realize how programs actually run. For C++, choose a compiler, whatever, like G++, use the compiler to compile the code into machine code, and then your computer can run it. CPU executes the instructions and things work. And I strongly believe that having just a basic understanding of how a program runs is so important to learning anything else with programming. Like, even if it doesn't affect how you program, just like I don't know anything right now about hardware, like the structure, whatever architecture of the CPU, I don't know anything about it. But I should still probably learn that, as it'll have an effect on how I write code and knowing the hardware and what's actually physically happening with the computer. And there's gonna be probably a difference with how I write some code, specific code, how I write the code versus someone that knows what's actually happening physically with the hardware. So I should probably get to learning that soon. After thinking about this, I thought, maybe I should have said something about how programs run. And I really regret not ever explaining that more deeply in the class. And I really regret a lot more times while teaching, explaining things away as, oh wait, the simple answer is, or, something like, well, the short answer is that blah, 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 and stuff like, oh, we don't need to worry about that. To avoid explaining things more in detail, you just, pass it off as, oh, it's not important right now. You don't need to know. I think as a teacher, this is terrible. And the simple answer, giving the simple answer to students doesn't do anything. It misses out on the key information as the difference between the student and the teacher. All the experience, all the knowledge, and all the specific little details about stuff that you should tell the student. So what kind of teacher are you if you don't explain those answers with some depth? I sit at my desk recording this now. I think of one thing. I think that one aspect of teaching, one important aspect, is to balance everything. I think it's bad to give surface level answers to students, but I think it's also bad to explain every single detail that isn't really important. And it is really a struggle to balance the role of a teacher to explain specifics and also to leave some details to be discovered by the learner, by their own curiosity. But this conflict still ends up with the same conclusion, that the learner should end up with a higher level of understanding. But how do you do that? Reflect. Reflect on yourself as a teacher and as a learner. Think, does the learner have the same context about what you're teaching as you do? Think, does this make sense to other people that don't already have the knowledge that you do? Does what you're teaching actually make sense? Or is it that you already know the information and it makes sense for you because you already know it? If you're a teacher, if you're a mentor, if you give advice to people, it is important to share the reasons. It's important to share the specifics. It's important to share the details. You should talk about the difference between compiled and interpreted languages. You should go on that rant about why C++ has semicolons. You should go on that rant about why radians are better than degrees and why degrees make no sense. You should do all of that. You're here to teach, to make sure that the students understand the topics and ideas as well as you do. So I beg for you to reflect on yourself as a teacher and as a learner. Ask yourself, if you were taught by yourself, would you learn and have all of the knowledge that you have today? Or would you teach like Danny?